Let's explore the important but often overlooked site of Lincluden Abbey, its history and its many associations with Robert Burns, including its influences on his works. Lincluden Collegiate Church, commonly known as Lincluden Abbey, has a history dating back to the 12th century and gave its name to an area of new housing in the 1950s. In the 1160s, a monastery was founded by Uchtred, Lord of Galloway. The site lay at the easternmost edge of Galloway, the boundary being the Clouden and the Nith. At this time, Galloway was its own small kingdom, not part of Scotland. Sometimes it would be at peace with Scotland, other times it was hostile, and sometimes allied with England. There was already an abbey at nearby Hollywood, but here at Lincluden, Uchtred founded a convent of nuns of the Benedictine order. This was an order who mainly stayed within their monastery precincts. Most of their time would be spent praying for the souls of their founders and patrons, with song being a key part of their worship. This manuscript in Dumfries Museum was almost certainly written at Lincluden Abbey in the 14th century. It has the text for services during the week leading up to Easter. The position of prioress was usually held by a woman of high status with a well-connected family. In 1296, Prioress Lady Eleonora was one of the worthies who swore allegiance and submission to King Edward I of England. This carved stone tomb cover is displayed at Dundrennan Abbey near Kirkcudbright. It is of a Lady Blanche, who was once a prioress and died around 1440. A tradition says that she was the last prioress of Lincluden and was buried out at Dundrennan long after her own convent had been closed. Whatever the truth of that, this is a good example of a memorial of a prioress of the period. In 1389, Archibald the Grim, 3rd Earl of Douglas and Lord of Galloway, petitions Pope Clement VII to suppress the nunnery at Lincluden on the ground that the nuns were living dissolute and scandalous lives and failing to keep the buildings in good repair. This seems to be a trumped-up charge in an attempt to gain control of the site and set up a new foundation there, which at the time would be a way to have the prayers said for his own soul. Lincluden Abbey was replaced by a collegiate church. This meant that there was a provost in charge of 8 canons, priests who were based at the site, but would also work out in the community, including serving at Hollywood Abbey, which had by this time a hospital as part of its complex. This is a papal bull, a lead seal for official documents. This one, now in Dumfries Museum, was found at Lincluden and has the name of Benedict XIII. It probably related to permission to construct new buildings at Lincluden. Medieval mason's marks are still visible at Lincluden. The early rebuilding was overseen by the French master mason John Morrow. A carved inscription from Melrose Abbey, which he also built, mentions the work at Lincluden in Nithsdale. Here is a painted reconstruction of that stone. It is written in rhyme. John Morrow, sometime call it was I, and born in Paris certainly, and had in keeping all mason work of St. Andrews ye high kirk, of Glasgow, Melrose and Paisley, of Nithsdale and of Galloway. I pray to God of Mary baith, and sweet St. John keep this haily kirk for skaith. The east end of the early 15th century church at Lincluden shows the style of windows typical of John Morrow, also his manner of cutting channels in the ends of the window tracery for lead to be poured in to help fix the adjacent piece. In 1429, Princess Margaret, daughter of Robert III, King of Scotland, and widow of the 4th Earl of Douglas, paid for a chaplain at Lincluden to pray for the soul of her late husband, who had been killed in France and buried in Tours Cathedral. In 1450, Princess Margaret herself died at Threave Castle and was buried in an elaborate canopied tomb at Lincluden. In 1460, Mary of Geldre, regent for the child King James III of Scotland, received at Lincluden Margaret of Anjou, Queen of Henry VI of England, and Edward, Prince of Wales, following the Lancastrian defeat at the Battle of Northampton. King Henry VI of England was suffering from long-term mental illness, and his wife and son were running the royal court in trying times during the Civil War, later known as the Wars of the Roses. The English royal court therefore took respite at Lincluden in the provost's lodging, the domestic ranges to the north of the church, and presumably many tents also. This drawing is a speculative illustration by John McCormick in the 19th century. It gives an idea of the extent of the church by the end of the 16th century. In 1505 and again in 1506, James IV visited and paid drink silver to the stonemasons, indicating that building work was still going on. This aerial view shows a formal garden which was originally laid out in the 16th century after the Reformation, when the collegiate church became a Renaissance home for the provost. The design is similar to examples below Stirling Castle. James Wells' map of Lincluden from the late 1780s shows what it could have been like when Burns first encountered the site. The concentric circles are a raised mound. It is thought that this was a motte from an early 12th century castle reworked into a viewing platform. The view would be over the decorative garden to the northeast of the church. By 1700, both the church and the provost mansion had been abandoned. The structures became a useful source of stone for buildings in the area. So let's now explore some of the connections of Lincluden Abbey and Robert Burns. Lincluden was on one of the routes which Burns could take from Ellisland to Dumfries, and after moving to the stinking Vennel in the town centre, it was along a favourite walk of his which he followed when wandering out of town. This is an 18th century view of the ruins, and we can see there's still a roof in place on the church. This has been replaced by Robert Maxwell, 1st Earl of Nithsdale in 1629, connecting his family to the history of the area, at the same time as he was building the Nithsdale lodging inside Calaverat Castle. The Maxwells of Nithsdale were particularly keen on emphasising their historical links to the area, particularly to Regals, and Burns paid tribute to this in his song, Nithsdale's Welcome Hame, or The Noble Maxwells. Peg Nicholson was the horse of William Nicol, who was from Annandale and had accompanied Burns on his Highland tour in 1787. He was the Willie who brewed a peck of malt in Burns' song. Nicol had lent the horse to Burns while at Ellisland to use or to sell if he needed the money. The horse was named after Margaret Nicholson, a woman who tried to stab George III in 1786. Following the horse Peg's death in 1790, Burns sent an elegy to Nicol along with his covering note. "That damned mare of yours is dead. I would freely have given her price to have saved her. She has vexed me beyond description. I refused 55 shillings for her. I fed her up and had her in first order for Dumfries Fair, when 4 or 5 days before she was seized with an unaccountable disorder of the sinews." The elegy, in song form, describes how Burns had thrown the horse's body into the Nith. In the song we hear that she's floating down the Nith and past the mouth of Cairn. This is the River Clouden below the Abbey ruins. Grim Grizzle is a long poem by Burns, part of his Bawdry works, though scatological rather than sexual. We see the references to Lincluden's ruined walls in the words. Grim Grizzle is shown as a formidable woman of Lincluden who doesn't want to lose the manure from her cattle straying onto others' lands, and so tethers her cow and shouts at it to defecate. Her yells echo in the Abbey's ruined walls. Burns seems to have been inspired to write this poem from an epitaph he claimed he saw on his travels. He wrote, "Passing lately through Dunblane, while I stopped to refresh my horse, the following ludicrous epitaph, which I picked up from an old tombstone among the ruins of the ancient abbey, struck me particularly, being myself a native of Dumfriesshire." The epitaph ran, "Here lies with death old Grizzle Grim, Lincluden's ugly witch. O death, how horrid is thy taste, to lie with such a bitch." This is Francis Grose's illustration of the ruins at Lincluden, quite different to some of the others as it is taken from the north end, showing the provost's house and a gentleman fishing in the Clouden. Burns' friend and neighbour Robert Riddle provided the history of Lincluden for Francis Grose's work. Francis Grose was a friend of Burns. He was an Englishman who had been a militia captain and was compiling a book of the antiquities of Scotland, having already completed an antiquities of England and Wales. They had met at Friar's Carse, close to Ellisland, where Burns asked to include in his book an engraving of Alloway Kirk in Ayrshire, where his father was buried. Grose agreed on condition that Burns wrote a tale to accompany the picture, and the result was the epic poem Tam O'Shanter, written at Ellisland and considered by Burns to be his best work. The association of romantic ruins and the supernatural had become a popular theme of Burns' time, and the poet went on to explore this in his works featuring his local ruin, Lincluden Abbey. The Minstrel at Lincluden, a poem by Burns written after he had moved into Dumfries, describes the ruined walls and the rivers flowing below. The poem has a supernatural character and explores the themes of passing of time, loss and former joy, the constancy of the landscape and ruins alongside our transient experiences. Burns hints that we cannot always understand those who came before us, though we may be experiencing the same emotions. Burns may have been inspired by these carvings on visits to Lincluden. Here we see an early 15th century depiction of an angel playing an instrument known as a gittern, and another carving depicting a lute player. Burns' best known association with Lincluden is the song Car the Yows to the Nows. He originally heard the song sung by John Clooney, a schoolmaster and singing tutor at Markinch. Burns described this as a beautiful song in a true old Scotch taste, and sent it to James Johnson for inclusion in the Scots Musical Museum. Burns decided he liked the song, but felt it needed to be adapted and set in a location. He reworked it into a second version and sent this in a letter to George Thompson in September 1794 for it to be included in his other ongoing music project, Select Scottish Airs. Burns wrote, "In a solitary stroll which I took today, I tried my hand on a few pastoral lines." Having by this time left his farming life behind him and moved his family from Ellisland into a small first-floor apartment on a road in Dumfries town centre known as the Stinking Vennel, it seems that Burns was inspired by his walks back into the countryside. Again, he is making use of the supernatural in this version and has deliberately chosen the atmospheric ruins of Lincluden and mentions of fairies. Yonder Clouden's silent towers, where at moonshine's midnight hours, o'er the dewy bending flowers, fairies dance sae cheery. He continues the eldritch associations, Gace na bogle shalt thou fear, and suggests a love outlasting the mortal span in the line, I can die but canna part. The Lincluden version of Car the Yowes to the Nows has endured well and become a favourite in traditional music and in schools. The sculpture, Robert Burns' Rock, outside St Michael's Churchyard in Dumfries, where Burns himself is buried in the mausoleum, was unveiled in 2013, carved from Lockerbrig's sandstone by Nithsdale stonemasons. The scenes depict some of Burns' most famous works like To a Mouse and Tam O'Shanter, but much of the rock is given over to Car the Yowes. This photograph was taken on Robert Burns' birthday, 25th of January. The dusting of snow on the words sets them off beautifully.